Bosses of Reddit, what the worst interview you've seen? I had to interview a guy for some contract labor, and when I showed him our work vehicle he shook my hand and said I'm sorry but I refuse to drive a Chevy and left. I was speechless. He was giving me the story of how hard he is having it. I decided to give him a shot, and because we had a Silverado for the work vehicle he turned it down. He has 3 young children. Kid was in high school, put down his friends as references, and had to fill out the application twice because the first time he screwed up. Me, what made you apply? I ask this question more to see what type of response that can create on the spot. I like to see if they can formulate a decent response while thinking on their feet. Kid, well, all my friends work here so I don't think it would really be like a job to me. More like kicking it with the homies. Me, would your friends being employed here get in the way of you working? Kid, maybe. I mean our auto class teacher makes all of us split up in class and we can't work together. I work in software development. As part of the interview process at my company, our candidates interview over Skype using a code sharing website for them to complete a small and relatively simple problem to help weed out candidates who are dishonest on their resumes. In one of my interviews, I started with the usual introduction of myself, my role within the company, so on and so forth. I introduce her to the task and explain that it'll be on a code sharing website and that she'll need to follow the link I will send her to access it. I paste the link into the text window and explain to her how to access it. Some people haven't used Skype before and don't know how to access text chat in a video call. She smiles and nods and asks me when I'm done, will you be writing the link on the whiteboard? What whiteboard? I look behind me and remember that yes, there is a small whiteboard behind me, and this woman was expecting me to handwrite the, not so short, link and she would read it off the webcam to type it into her browser. No, I explain, I sent you the link within Skype itself. If you'll just click. I'm forced to trail off as she reaches forward and picks up her webcam, which I'm assuming was mounted to the top of her monitor. I get a nice close-up of her eye as she peers inside the camera, then turns it on its side to observe it some more. I ask her what she's doing. Trying to find the link, she replies. Dumbfounded. I once again explain that the link was sent over Skype and wouldn't appear behind me nor on the webcam. She resumes the smile and nod routine as I ask her to follow my directions to access the Skype text chat window. I ask her to wave her mouse cursor over my face until she sees some buttons appear. She takes her hand off the mouse, raises it, and waves it over the screen. I explain to her again that she needs to use the mouse and she smiles and nods again. After about 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview, she did finally discover the link in the Skype text chat, but she proceeded to type it into her browser by hand. She did not make it to the next round. I think you interviewed a simplistic guy. Not the worst, but the weirdest. Guy applied for a warehouse delivery position. Had emailed back and forth with a few questions before the interview, and it sounded promising. He comes in, sits down and says, "So, what is this position? Delivery? Oh, I can't lift anything. Also, I lost my driver's license a few months ago. I guess we're done here." And then just got up and left. No thank you or goodbye, just got up and left. It was the shortest, most bizarre interview I've ever done. Back when I was HR manager for a market research firm, one of the most awkward interviews was with my candidate and his mother. This 19-year-old who apparently had previous work experience in customer service brought his mother into the interview with him. I politely questioned his mother as to the reasoning of her joining in on the interview, and I was told, "I'm just making sure this is the right company for him and making sure you're asking fair questions." I decided to roll with it. Why not? This is the most interesting thing I've had all week, so I asked my first question. She answered for him. I politely explained that the interviews I conduct are with the candidate only unless special accommodations are required. I was told, "I'm not going anywhere." I thanked them both for coming out and explained that the position requires problem solving and critical thinking on an individual level. Unless I am hiring the both of them under one salary working together as a full-time equivalent, this wouldn't work. I was then told I would be sued and to frick myself. A woman was about 15 years older than I was and clearly didn't understand that I was the one actually interviewing her for the job. This was an engineering position on my team making $175K. She was very candid with me regarding her overall personality and actually put her purse on her lap at one point and doing her makeup while we were talking. I guess she thought I was the secretary and she was making small talk before meeting with my boss. I asked a guy when would he be available to begin work if offered the position. His response was that he would have to put down his dogs in order to begin work as soon as possible but was willing to do that to get the job. We called him almost immediately after the interview to tell him he wasn't selected and hopefully save his dogs' lives. Should have flipped that around. Give me the job if you want these dogs to live. Interviewing for an international sales rep in a rural area. Boss nephew invited himself in and his question was, what is your blood type? I was mortified. Glanced at him, then across to the candidate, who had traveled 200 km/120 mi for the interview and was better than we'd hoped for. And you guessed it, best candidate rejected our subsequent offer and boss nephew said he wasn't suitable anyway. Freaking idiot. Had a girl sit across from me, put her elbow on my desk, then rested her head flat on her hand so that her head was now sideways. She stayed that way through the entire interview. Another time I asked a guy if he had any special skills. He replied, keeping it real with y'all. Worst one I had was a guy that showed up and refused to answer any question. I don't know, that doesn't apply to me. So after 6 questions I asked, do you expect to get hired after this? He said yes. Guy told us that he applied so long ago he forgot which position it was for. We then proceeded to show him the job description and he said, I don't even know what this piece of equipment is. It was a maintenance job. He apologized for wasting our time but he got a free bottle of water, so I guess it worked out for him. When my dad was going through applications, in the reason for leaving last job part, a man wrote that he had shot his previous boss in the head. His PO had told him to be honest. I had a guy come in for a CDL and site work, truck driving and earth moving equipment position. After the initial pleasantries he went on to inform me that he didn't like small talk. His pet peeve is people who socialize too much on the job when there is work to be done. He likes to get right to it and get hammering away on that work. He just doesn't understand these people who just talk instead of getting on with it. Not like him. He's not interested in chatting. No, he's got a better work ethic than these dang kids and he's not going to stand around gabbing about nothing when time is wasting etc etc. He went on like that, no exaggeration, for an hour and 20 minutes. A solid hour and a half including the initial question and answer bit at the beginning. I wasn't even mad, I just let him ramble on. At the end of it he asked if he would be starting that day or if I needed to do some of this paperwork stuff for him. He hadn't even filled out his pre-hire information forms. Absolutely majestic. A person I know had someone come in for an interview wearing gym shorts and a tank top, fresh from playing tennis in the summer sun. Another candidate came in with their mother and asked if she could sit in on the interview and help answer questions. The interviewer asked if the mother was the one applying for the position. Without a word, the mother got up and left to sit in the waiting area. One time an applicant told me that he was temporarily placed in charge of a team, and one of the team members spoke mostly French, so he told him to learn English or get the frick out of here, and then subsequently sent him home when he did not immediately learn English. The question was, tell me about a time that you worked well under loose supervision. Just a few weeks ago I interviewed a girl for a healthcare position. The question was something like, tell me about a time you were forced into a new situation and how did you deal with it. She proceeds to tell us about the time she was forced to move to an area with colored people and how she learned to deal with them. We needed an appliance repair guy. They didn't need to have any formal training, but they needed to know what they were doing. The standard test was we tossed him in a room with a broken whatever we had around and asked them to diagnose it. One guy completely dismantled it and couldn't put it back together again. I walked in and he's got his hat off. He's rubbing his head, muttering to himself surrounded by parts. I asked him to leave, so the next guy to apply for the job got shown to the same room and was told put this back together. I sat in on interviews with a manager at the restaurant I worked at. I remember this application he pulled specifically cause the kid was from the same rough part of town the manager was. The manager comes in on a 5-minute rant on how much he hates scam artists trying to get money off decent people in the streets. Upon hearing this, the kid launched into a story about telling people he locked his keys in the car with his wallet and just needed $20 for pop a lock. Explains he could make $300 on a good day. The kicker? He doesn't have a car. He laughs while all of us stare at him dumbfounded. Manager kicked him out. He got a job down the street. I was working as a front-end supervisor for a big box retailer going into the holiday season. This was the beginning of November. I get this girl who came in for an interview and I let her know it was seasonal work, but that we would be keeping some of the seasonal hires after January, and inquired as to whether she was looking for seasonal or long term. In the most stereotypical Valley Girl voice I've ever heard, she replied, "Well, I basically got in trouble for bad grades and staying out too late, and my parents are making me pay for my own car insurance this month." That was it. She just stared at me expecting her to hire her on the spot. I did not do that. I do still wonder if she ever got a job that helped her pay her car insurance for that month, though. I was asking the asinine HR mandated questions for a senior IT role and got to, "Have you ever been criticized for anything?" The normal response is, "Number, my boss says I work too hard." This normal up until now guy thought for a bit and said, "I get angry when people try to pull the wool over my eyes," and sat glaring at the table. After a bit I asked if he was okay. He looked up and began a 20-minute rant about the people who tried to pull the wool over his eyes. He was devastated when I called him the next day. He thought he'd done pretty well and demanded a written statement of why he hadn't been offered the job. We had an applicant for a teaching position who stated on his resume that he held a Master of Music degree from Yale. When interviewing him, I asked what he thought of Woolsey Hall, Yale's primary concert hall, and its renowned pipe organ. By his answer and facial expression, I could tell he'd never been there. After he left, I called contacts at the university who confirmed that they'd never heard of him and no one by his name had received a degree there. I once interviewed a guy for a work-study position at a college radio station. The position was for 10 hours a week as a sports reporter. I told him that he would sometimes have to carry the equipment for the remote broadcast of sports, and he immediately took his shoe and sock off and put his foot on the table to show me a scar on his foot. Tells me that he has a plate in his foot and sometimes it hurts and he wouldn't be able to carry heavy things when it was hurting. Interviewer: "So, what qualities can you bring to the team?" Applicant: I don't know." Interviewer: "Well, what do you consider yourself good at?" Applicant: I don't know." Interviewer: "Okay, why did you apply to the position?" Applicant: "They told me to." Interviewer: "Who told you to apply?" Applicant: I don't know." I'll give you an example of the inverse. Applied to a pool service company. They wanted me to do a ride along for a day to see how I'd work out. Now, pool cleaning is easy. A chimp can do it. It turned out the real reason was to give me what I call the Rush Limbaugh test. There was a point in the day where the guy took a break and turned the truck radio on to listen to Rush. My reaction was monitored very closely. I stayed completely neutral. Well, it turned out that anything less than a rabid and enthusiastic response to Rush disqualified you from working there. Interviewed a lady who, at the time, had been a stay-at-home mom for the past 13 years. Her answer to each question was, "I'm a mom, I deal with that all the time," or something along those lines. Didn't actually answer the question for almost all questions. I felt bad for her, really. I'm not a boss, but my boss was actually just telling me about a woman she interviewed for my job about 6 months before I was hired. She came in for the interview in cut-off jean shorts and a nice top that was more appropriate for the club scene. Anyway, my boss decided early on in the interview that this woman wouldn't be hired. After all the initial, cliche questions, the woman would answer "I'm not sure. They say they're goodbyes. We'll let you know." Kind of crap, even though they didn't hire her. The following Monday though, she came in for work. They had to tell her she didn't have the job and they were still going over all the other applicants. She left but came back Tuesday and then Wednesday, and every day she came in for a week or two, thinking she had the job. My boss finally had to tell her if she came back, they would call the police on her. She finally got the hint, but dang, she really wanted to work, I guess. This sounds like a story an old person would tell about how they actually got a job doing this. I'm a director at a technology company in NY and I was interviewing a candidate for a manager position to oversee a large team of people in the US as well as offshore. This person was a referral from an employee that I didn't think very highly of, but my company takes referrals seriously so I went along with it. This candidate could not have been more unprepared. They had no idea what the company did. They knew nothing about the position they were applying for, and for the first 15 minutes they asked about personal time off, vacation time, and the option to work from home, and then asked if they could get started immediately. I'm not a boss, but at a previous job I was often asked to do technical interviews for software engineer and software engineer in test positions. This one guy comes in for an interview and a coworker and I go in to do the usual thing. At this point this particular coworker and I have done enough interviews to where we know where each other is going with a certain line of questions, so we just start doing our thing. However, it very quickly became apparent this guy didn't know his head from his ass. From a hiring perspective it was an easy pass, but we couldn't just end the interview there and send him on their way. People seem to get mad at that, so we start asking him progressively easier and easier questions, and he keeps getting them wrong. Eventually I dip into programming 101 stuff and ask him about basic data types. Still fails miserably. I look at his resume and it says something like expert Java programmer, so I ask him an opinion question. What's your favorite thing about Java? Oh, I don't really know it. I just know they used it at my last company. In my head I'm thinking, then WTF is it doing on your resume? I mean, if you wanted the keyword you could have said something like worked with Java or familiar with Java environments or something vague, but dang. At that point you can't trust anything on the guy's resume. Red flags everywhere. So after the most grueling hour interview I've ever been through, we start going through the end routine. We thank him for his time and ask him if he has any questions for us, and this guy without skipping a beat is like, so when do I start? I feel like I nailed that interview. Coworker recommended his friend's girlfriend. She was doing okay in the interview, but suddenly she just stood up and walked out the door. She got into her car and called her boyfriend, crying. The rest of the afternoon was calls between her and her boyfriend, and boyfriend to coworker and her staring at our front door with tears streaming down her face. Most of the employees snuck out the back to avoid her. I was parked right next to her and she stayed for hours so she could be sure to see how upset she was. I found out that she finds any opportunity to get really emotional and manipulate her boyfriend with it. She was still considered a maybe right up until she walked out. Here's Bob Ross holding a baby raccoon to brighten your day. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and comment. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.